Good afternoon. This is Melanie Baru, and I am doing a part of our lecture on to parent or not. Our last time together, I went over some aspects of parenting that included having children, and then also those that remain child free. And so this portion of lecture is going to be about uh, not having children for various reasons. So, for example, abortion, and then also infertility, talking a little bit about infertility and the risks of infertility, and also some really interesting aspects of um, kind of medical treatment as it relates to infertility. So that's what we'll be talking about in this second portion of the lecture to parent or not to parent. And so abortion is the expulsion of the embryo or fetus from the uterus, either naturally or medically. Typically, people don't use the word abortion when it's natural. Usually, you hear the term miscarriage. That's a natural expulsion of the embryo or fetus from the uterus. Medically is typically what we know as abortion, the like everyday language that we use. And typically, if you, I'm sure you've had classes where they talked about abortion, and it's really interesting. Several things happen when that subject matter comes up. One is it's obviously a very controversial subject matter, and oftentimes when people talk about it, it's very much in a debate format, which doesn't really do too much, I don't think, for folks, because people get on, I'm on this side and you're on this side, and people really just kind of start talking at each other, and it doesn't really help. It really doesn't help much. So, um, so if we were in class, we would just have a conversation about it, not for or against. We're just like kind of what is. And then also another thing too, that when the subject matter of abortion comes up, people are really people become very religious, even when they're not so religious or so practicing. It's like we can't have this conversation without all of a sudden everybody's really religious about it, and so or about life and everything. And so I want to just kind of share some aspects of abortion that may be interesting. So, for example, induced abortion is purposely obtaining an abortion. 30% of American women had an abortion at some point in their lives. And so I have a quote after this, I believe it's after this slide that I'll add on to it. But about 699,202 abortions were performed in the US. That's an um, outdated source, and so I need to update that. But that was 2012. I don't know exactly what it is at this point, but I can definitely find that out. Also, 91.4% of abortions were performed at or less than the 13th week of gestation. I think that's really important to know, is because when people talk about abortion and they're really against it, oftentimes they're talking about exceptional cases and not the rule. The majority of folks are having abortions early on in their pregnancy. And so, again, we're looking at 91.4% of abortions at or less than the 13th week of pregnancy. Okay. So the next slide is actually reasons for abortions. So, the top reasons that your book talks about of why people have reported about having an abortion are: one is interfering on their educational path and or work path, the affordability as a couple or as a single parent, in particular a single mother, and then also couple problems, finishing having their family, the sense of readiness, and prenatal diagnosis. So again, these are the top reasons why folks have reported why they had an abortion, right? So I'll go over some of them. One is interfering on educational path and or work path. So you all are going to school, many of you are working, and you have a certain you're on a certain trajectory, right? You're in a certain path, you see your life going a certain way. And many of these women have thought that as well. And and then realize that they find out that they're pregnant and what that may mean for their future. And so they make that decision to say, no, I was working on my education. I was working on my path, work path, and I'm going to continue to do so. Also, the issue of affordability as a couple or as a single mother. So one is, some folks are saying, uh, that they can't afford to have a child, to introduce a child into the world, and maybe they didn't plan for that, because of a lack of affordability. Or some folks are together and they get pregnant, and then their partner is saying, what are you going to do with this? Like, I don't want to be a parent. So you have to really think about, if you do this, you're going to be a single parent, and what that may mean to you emotionally, mentally, financially, and all of that. Or also the notion of, so again, just making that, or maybe there wasn't this wasn't part of a relationship, and then you got pregnant in that situation, and then, and then a pregnancy results. Also, folks also talk about reporting couple problems. And so the reality is, as many of you know, if not most of you know, that there's oftentimes a gray area in terms of the breakup of a relationship. And so while the couple is in many ways kind of dying, if you will, the life of the relationship is kind of dying, and there's a gray area, there might be a back and forth notion that, that many times they're still having sex. And so with them still having sex, a pregnancy can happen, and sometimes does. And so the notion of like, okay, we're on our way out, or we're trying to resolve this, it's not working, what do we do? And realize, maybe this is not the best situation, right? To have a life being born in the end of our relationship. Also, folks reporting that they finished having their family and that they were done. And then they realized they ended up getting pregnant later on in life, and said, I didn't sign up for this. I raised all my children. My children went off to college, maybe. And now, if find themselves pregnant and realize I have to start all over again. And maybe you put your life on hold so that you can get your career and your education going, like some of my students have done what society has asked them to do, what has required them to do, and did all of that, and said, well, now it's their turn to get an education, their turn to get a career as a middle-aged woman in many ways. And then they find out that they're pregnant and said, I can't start all over again. Some people also report readiness, just not feeling ready for what parenthood is going to, that's going to entail. And then also a prenatal diagnosis, right? So taking the test and realizing that there's some medical issues and concerns, mother for both, and realize that they don't want to take that risk. And so those are some reasons. It's interesting. There's a couple of stories that I have here, that I would probably typically share with you in person, but I'm not. I'll share one, in terms of finishing having a family. I had a returning student who just, in fact, she just did that, right? She was in my class. We're going over this lecture, and she was able to relate. She said, I did everything that society wanted me to do. I did everything, she said. She says, my last child's off to college. And she goes, and I postponed my life, and I sacrificed for my children. And it's my turn to go to college, and my turn to make something of myself. And this was her words. And then she found out that she was pregnant. And she was, again, kind of an older woman. And she's like, I absolutely can't do that. She's like, I refuse to start over. I did everything that society would want me to do, and I did it. And it came at a cost. And she's like, no more. It's my turn. And so she made that decision, and she was bold enough and she had the courage to be able to share her truth in the middle of class, where obviously the subject matter is very taboo, and oftentimes there's a lot of judgment and shame around it. And so, so she shared that with the class. Let's see. So this is a quote from your book. Although women who have abortions and women who have children are often perceived as two distinct groups, in reality, they are the same women at different times and points in their life. So again, remember we said 30% of all women experience abortion. Now, keep in mind, so that means they could have had an abortion early on when they were maybe like a teenager, and then later on they ended up having a family. It could be where they had their family, and like this last story that I shared, they had their family and later on they had an abortion. There can be a situation where during, in the middle of their relationship or the middle of children, they ended up having an abortion, or there was a rape. It can be a whole different amounts of scenarios, but they're the same women. So they're not two distinct women. They're not women that were, this is the category of women that have abortions and this is a category of women that don't. They're the same women at different points in their life. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Screenomatic only lets me do 15 minutes at a time, so I'm going to try to figure out a better way to be able to do this, but I'm done for this one right now, and then I will talk with you further on the next 15-minute segment. Thank you.